Michigan versus USC. Two blue blood programs with two different identities, with two new coaching staffs, with two very new rosters, with all they lost after 2023. And it was a epic battle. And along with Nebraska versus Illinois, I think the game of the week, or at least a finalist for the game of the week. Michigan 27, USC 24. It was a war in the big house. You got to see trench warfare with Kalel Mullings and Donovan Edwards and Greg Crippen and Jonah Monheim and Woody Marks and USC's offensive line and defensive line and Deanton Lynn going up against Michigan's offensive line and defensive line and their running back room and Wink Martindale and Sharon Moore. And it was such a good game that I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this is a program-defining loss for USC. In fact, what I will argue is that this loss defines USC's program in positive terms. This performance was impressive for USC, despite the loss. And I think that goes to show how good USC is, but also the fact that while Michigan has taken a step back compared to last season, they are still a force to be reckoned with. I'll explain all of that and more and break down this game. Welcome back, everyone. It's College Football with Sam. I know that you all are football fanatics, and I'm a football fanatic as well. So if you want content from the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube and soon to be best college football channel on YouTube, I want you to like the video, to subscribe to the channel, to click the notification bell, and to comment your thoughts on this matchup, your reaction and analysis down in the comment section below. Also, please share this video around to other college football fanatics that you know who are passionate and invested in the sport like we are. And check out my Patreon page and sign up as an All-American or Heisman member so that you can get access to my weekly picks for all college football games that include Power 4 teams, and the picks are both against the spread and also who's going to win straight up. And also join our Discord server via the link in the description and down below in the pinned comment, where you can also find my Patreon page and merchandise store. We talk college football 24/7 on the Discord server. It's especially active on Saturdays, and we are still looking for applications for moderators on that server. Also, if you want to moderate on my YouTube lives, shoot me an email at collegefootballwithsam@gmail.com, or if you have any questions. But just doing those things, liking, subbing, hitting the bell, commenting, they'll help out the channel tremendously. So if you could take some time to do those things, I'd appreciate that. But let's get back to business and talk about what was an awesome top 20 showdown. Now top 15, if you look at the present rankings of both of these teams. Michigan is now rated 12th. USC is rated 13th. And what was really intriguing about this game was how Michigan's offense was obviously so one-dimensional. Yet at the same time, USC's offense for most of this game was also one-dimensional because of what Michigan's defense did. Michigan ran the ball for nearly 50 times and did not pass it for even close to 20. And Michigan had a pick six as one of their 4 touchdowns on the day. And the 27 is due to the fact that USC blocked an extra point. It was a very weird game. It was a game that was an anomaly, an exception to the rule in many cases, but nonetheless a very good game, and one where I think both teams should come away with a sense of pride. Obviously, Michigan won. Michigan has nothing to really be upset or angry about. There are things to critique, but we'll get into that in a few minutes. As for USC, there are things to reflect. A loss is always frustrating. However, Michigan is probably USC's worst matchup on their schedule when you look at how USC is built and how their opponents are built. And again, I'll get into that in a few minutes. But what I like to do here on College Football with Sam is always go over the bird's eye view of things. And then after we see the forest, we can dive in and see the trees. Michigan averaged 5.6 yards per play, and they scored nearly a half point per play, 0.45 points per play to be exact. USC, on the other hand, scored they had 5.2 yards per play, and they scored 0.312 points per play. USC here, they had 52 passing attempts and 21 rushing attempts, 21 carries. They had 73 total plays compared to Michigan's 58. They had 15 more plays. And it's not like USC was going up tempo for the whole game. USC outgained Michigan in yardage. They had 5 more first downs, and they won the TOP battle by about a minute 30. And outside of Michigan's final drive, which was just over 3 minutes, USC controlled the clock basically from the start of the second half. And what this goes to show, I think, is the fact that Michigan's offense is not good. It is a one-dimensional, one-trick pony offense. However, they are, in my view, watching the game, observing how D'Anton Lynn made wonderful adjustments, observing Michigan's blocking, the running capability of Donovan Edwards and particularly Kalel Mullings. Michigan does have a near elite, and if the offensive line continues to improve upon their past struggles, and they had some struggles in this game, but this was the best the O-line performed all year, they could have an elite offensive line and more specifically an elite rushing attack by the end of the year. Michigan is a specialized offense, and on top of that, they have a defense that can be really good, can be an NFL-level defense if it's coordinated properly. Wink Martindale showed against Texas how not to utilize Michigan's defense, and he showed against USC how to utilize Michigan's defense. Michigan was more efficient despite being more limited, and it's a testament that Michigan did not have a single productive drive in the second half, and yet they were within striking distance the whole game because of Will Johnson's pick six, but also because their 2 touchdown drives in the first half were a masterclass in running the football, in creating speed and space for both Edwards and Mullings, for breaking tackles, for powering and pushing forward. And as for USC, they had to be methodical. They couldn't be explosive. And the few explosive plays they had were created by Miller Moss's genius, not by the staff. So I think that's what the statistics reflect here. And then you see that the turnover margin was dead even. Both had 2 turnovers. Michigan only had 1 turnover from the offense. Their other turnover was Kenneth Grant's fumble recovery being stripped by Woody Marks, who I would say would be awarded the Trooper of the Game award if I were to give such a thing out, like the player who hustles the most and plays the hardest. It would either be Woody Marks or Kalel Mullings. It would be one of the two. Mullings obviously had the more statistically impressive game, had the more impressive game as a running back, but when you steal a fumble out of the defender's hands, that's like A+ effort. So good on Woody Marks, and he's a player that I kind of feel bad for, that he had to be on the losing side here. Michigan had 3 penalties for 25 yards. USC had 6 penalties in this game for, I believe, for 32. They had 6 penalties for 32 yards. The majority of them, the vast majority, were false starts. Then I think they had a defensive holding call or something along those lines. But a lot of their penalties were false starts. I actually think that Michigan and USC each had a penalty that offset, if I remember correctly. But that looked weird at first. 6 penalties for 32 yards, but that can happen sometimes. Again, it was a very weird game. Michigan did not pass the ball all that much. When they tried, they were unsuccessful, and they still came out on top. And that's very unusual to do against a team like USC, who is top 15, certainly top 20. They're one of the better teams in all of college football. I want to start off talking about the Trojans, then we'll talk about the Wolverines. After all, on this show, we save the best for last, and Michigan is the best because they won. So they're the best out of these two teams, at least from this matchup standpoint. USC, though, could be better than Michigan by the end of the year. They're Big Ten ready. They showed that they are tough, both mentally and even a little bit physically. Michigan was tougher physically, and mentally, I would say just as tough as USC. But that's not really to the fault of the Trojans, if you want to look at it from a 2024 only perspective. If you want to go back and say that after 2022, after the bowl performance by USC where they surrendered 46 points to Tulane, if you want to say Grinch should have been fired after that game and the changes to the defense, the upgrades made in 2024's preseason should have been made in 2023's preseason, you're totally correct. That's what should have happened. But should have, could have, would have, that's a game. That's imaginary. That's theoretical. And it's fun, but it's not reality. The reality is USC is where they are right now, and part of it is Lincoln Riley's fault, but also Lincoln Riley, when push came to shove, did make the decision to fire Alex Grinch and brought in this defensive staff. And the defense is better. It's way better than it was last year. This is a average, above average, good defense, and it's going to get better and better and better as the year goes on, as they have more training and coaching under this new staff, and they learn more from this staff, one of the best defensive staffs in the country. I would say USC is only behind, obviously, Iowa, and maybe Ohio State, maybe Michigan if Martindale and his defensive assistants continue to put on performances like they did on Saturday in terms of defensive coaching. Like, that's how good USC staff is, with Eric Henderson, with Doug Belk, with Matt Entz. Those are the position coaches. Sean Nua, former Michigan defensive line coach, is coaching their defensive ends. He did pretty well with Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabo. And then obviously DeAnton Lynn, who, as I've said, is up there, not at Phil Parker's level, but close in like that Einstein coordinator category. You saw that with the adjustments that he made. And this defense, they gave up some broken tackles. They sometimes lacked gap integrity. Frederick Moore had a 14-yard end around that was nearly a TFL. And I think that if USC was in year 2 of this system, they would have blown that play up. So you see that not everything is set yet. The concrete is still wet. It's setting, but you have to give it some time. You got to. And the offensive line obviously got abused, but Michigan's defensive line is one of the best, if not the best defensive line in all of college football. And USC, they have an experience at tackle. Jonah Monheim's their best player by a mile at center, but outside of him, they don't have proven offensive linemen. And I said that in the preseason. And I said in, I think, both my 5 reasons why USC will win and 5 reasons why Michigan will win video, that Michigan has a matchup advantage in the trenches. And you saw that on display. You did. But the Trojans never gave up. They were down 14-0. Michigan was bullying them. They were beating them to a pulp. They didn't give up. They fought back. And they outscored Michigan 21-6 at one point. Offensively, it was 21-0 shutout. And then Michigan just had that final drive. Michigan showed, yes, they were the more physically imposing team, but Michigan is in year 4 since the beginning of the 2021 season of so far still being the team to dethrone in the Big Ten. They'll probably be dethroned this year, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, because this type of performance won't work against Ohio State, probably not. But Michigan has been the king of one of the most physical conferences in college football. And last year, the Big Ten produced the better teams at the top than even the SEC. Ohio State and Michigan, I think, were better than anyone the SEC produced last year. Michigan beat out the Buckeyes, won the national championship. And even before 2021, Michigan was known to be physical. They were known to have talent on the lines of scrimmage and typically known to have good defenses, whether under DJ Durkin or Don Brown most of the years outside of the COVID year. Michigan is in like their nth year of being a team that wants to play great defense, that produces NFL players in the trenches, and that wants to pound the rock more than aerial bomb you. USC is not that way. USC is in their first year of trying to play physical ball. Year number one. So it's unfair to compare these two programs in that way and say, well, USC soft. They're not soft. Michigan was more physically imposing than they are, but Michigan's more physically competent and stronger and more explosive and powerful than most of the country. Michigan's issues do not revolve around their trench play or running back room or, after Saturday's performance, perhaps defense at all. They revolve in the passing game. If only offensive and defensive linemen and running backs were allowed to play the sport, Michigan might be the best team in the country. They're that good in the trenches and at running back when you factor all of that in. And heck, even include tight end if Colston Loveland is healthy. Michigan's problems do not reside there. Not one bit. And they had a critical advantage over USC in those areas. But the Trojans are Big Ten ready. And I think what shows in that is they were able to pressure Alex Orji. They blitzed the majority of the time when Michigan passed, which honestly makes sense. If you're D'Anton Lynn, you're going to be sending most of your guys forward, knowing that Michigan's going to run. And if Orji happens to pass, we'll make him uncomfortable so that he can't beat you. Michigan had some open receivers at times, but USC's pressure was able to get home. They had 2 sacks. They had 7 TFLs. They tackled Michigan nearly 70 times, and many of them weren't broken tackles. And I know they got most of their rushing yards on 1 carry from Woody Marks, but nonetheless, that was a well-blocked run. It wasn't just because Michigan's linebackers missed a key tackle. They were picking up that first down no matter what because they pulled their guard or tackle, I forget who, over to block up Mason Graham and had a path for Woody Marks to get through and pick up the first down. They made adjustments on their offensive line in the second half, and it just bought them some more time to at least have a chance to come back and take the lead. And they were given that chance by those adjustments. Good on the coaching staff. I think that the Trojans, while they're not national title contenders, and I don't think this team would beat Ohio State because Ohio State, we don't know if they're elite on the interior, if they're elite in the trenches, but they have been at minimum good every year under Day in those areas. They were, I think, elite defensively last year, average on the O-line. They looked better on the O-line, and I'm not going to discount that D-line. But outside of Ohio State, they can probably have a pretty good chance against anyone else. They can. Oregon, maybe. They don't play Oregon, so they don't have to worry about that. And Penn State's at home, and Notre Dame is at home. Rutgers and Nebraska are at home. Wisconsin next week is at home, and Wisconsin does not look good. This is a Big Ten ready team, and honestly, from what I can tell, they can go 10-2 or 11-1. They can win the remainder of their games with their only loss coming to a Michigan team that could finish the season 9-3 or 10-2. And that would not be a bad loss at all. First game in the Big Ten Conference against a team that just has a key matchup advantage against you in the trenches, which is the battle that matters the most. I documented that in a post this Sunday morning, after week 4. And while it doesn't ring true all the time, actually, I'm going to read it to you guys because I think it is really interesting stuff. And I may read this in some of my other videos when reacting to week 4 games or even predicting games in the future. This community post was called The Dancing of the Trenches. I say in here that in Michigan versus USC, Iowa versus Minnesota, and Illinois versus Nebraska, Michigan, Iowa, and Illinois who won those games combined for only 309 passing yards, but 760 rushing yards. Those teams, on an average basis, passed around 100 yards per game and ran for a little over 250. Their opponents passed for 789 yards, but they only ran for about 193 yards, which means on an average basis, they gave up like a little over 250 passing yards. Those three winners did, but they held their opponents to just under 70 rushing yards. That's mind-boggling stuff right there. And what I think that shows, and this has been the case for a long time, I think you're just seeing it more now because defenses like D'Anton Lynn's defense, the Ravens-style defense, Wink Martindale's is similar, Jesse Minter, Mike McDonald's is similar, Jim Knowles has had phenomenal defenses like at Oklahoma State that were able to limit what some of those powerful Big 12 offenses were able to do. And his defense last year shut down a really well-schemed and high-octane Missouri offense in the Cotton Bowl. Defenses are catching up to offenses, and that especially taken into consideration, trench play matters more than quarterback play. It does. Quarterback play raises your ceiling. It gives you a chance in any game if you have an elite QB. But your floor is still the bottomless pit if you don't have good trench play. Your trench play at least gives you consistency. It gives you a foundation. And on top of that, if you have elite trenches and you have like a Kalel Mullings or Donovan Edwards, or in the case of Iowa, a Caleb Johnson to go along with it, well, you have a really high ceiling too, because you can bust a few big plays on the ground. You can control the clock, impose your will. And USC doesn't have that. That's ultimately why they lost. I mean, Woody Marks is a great running back, but his offensive line is not good. It objectively is not good. LSU is pushing around that offensive line, and LSU's defense ain't good. And Woody Marks is a great running back, but he's not Kenneth Walker. He's not Derrick Henry. He's not Blake Corum. He may not even be Kalel Mullings. He's not Quinshon Judkins or Travion Henderson. Just isn't. So keeping that in mind, what USC must do in the future is utilize their athletes. This was the only reason why USC was in this game with Michigan, is they had a deep receiver room, a good quarterback, and they made phenomenal catches. They made catches in coverage. They were disciplined. And they had some drops by Zachariah Branch and other players. Part of that's the fact that they're young and they need to be, they need more experience. Part of that's also the fact that Michigan's defenders are big NFL guys who are explosive. And if they're schemed correctly, they're going to have success. They're going to get pick sixes. They will force fumbles. They will get pressure. That's Michigan's entire defense, if coordinated and managed properly, is a non-negotiable in and of itself. Not just the defensive line, though that is the strongest unit on defense. USC's biggest advantage over the rest of the Big Ten is their quarterback and receiver combination is lethal. Only Oregon and maybe Ohio State have that same combo. And I say maybe Ohio State because I haven't seen Will Howard or that offensive line play any defense that's worth a pulse. I have no clue what you're going to see from that team when they play a defense like Michigan's, for example, or Penn State's or Oregon's if they continue to improve. I think you'll see something like USC, perhaps even better, but we don't know. With Oregon, with some of their struggles early on, we may not know either. And those are the only two teams outside of maybe Penn State, too, with Kotelnicki and how their receivers have exploded and how Allers looked, that can really compete with USC in that way. Illinois is a good quarterback in Altmaier and a great receiver in Pat Bryant, but they don't have the depth that USC does, and they don't have that raw athlete type player that Zachariah Branches or Deuce Robinson is. So utilize your athletes, Trojans. And with 283 passing yards and 10 yards per completion and 3 passing touchdowns, this game was not on the passing offense. Moss was constantly pressured. When he did complete passes on an average basis, they led to a first down. And there were some drops by the receivers, but there were some critical injuries. Hopefully Mekhi Lemon recovers. Same with Lake McCree and anyone else who got hurt. I hate seeing injuries. Please be praying for them. Utilizing skill position players is USC's biggest strength because no one else on their schedule don't even care about Oregon or Ohio State. They don't play them in the regular season. No one outside of maybe Penn State will have comparable QB play or comparable explosiveness on offense. And that's more so due to Andy Kotelnicki and his schemes rather than raw talent, which USC has on top of the potential to scheme up great plays on offense. Let's talk about Michigan here. Michigan dominated in the trenches. Their defensive line owned. Their offensive line was efficient. And Kalel Mullings is easily running back number 1 as it stands. This game was, for Michigan, a much needed, desperately needed confidence boost. Because the Wolverines showed that when it looked like everything was about to fall apart, when things were falling apart, they showed that they were mentally tough still, that they were still physically tough, and that they were not going to go down without a fight. They put faith and trust in their identity, and it worked. It wasn't perfect. Kirk Campbell made some calls that, I thought were pretty asinine given the circumstances. Like, why are you passing on 3rd and short? Again, like what happened against Texas that really gave that game away to the blowout that it turned out to be. Like, just run Mullings up the middle. It's the same thing with Lincoln Riley and trying those shovel passes. Like, if Riley didn't do that, they probably win the game. USC does. For Michigan, on the other hand, if they run Mullings up the middle more, if they give him more carries early in this game and don't try and get cute sometimes, they may have won the game not needing a 4th and goal conversion within the final minute. But again, whataboutisms. They're useful in theory, and they're also useful to show what you can grow upon. USC, for example, had a great defense. They put up a tough fight, and they now know, I think certainly, that their outside play is much better than their inside play, and they should begin to play to that, and I think they will. As for Michigan, Michigan's inside play is in a different solar system than their exterior play. Michigan's defensive line, their offensive line, their running backs, their tight ends, far better than quarterback and wide receiver. Far better. The defensive line did a really phenomenal job, obviously, getting pressure. The linebackers and DBs did better than they had in previous games. Michigan just put on a show, a masterclass in what it means to be a physically tough team, what it means to be a Big Ten team. And as I said in my live reaction to this game on Saturday, imagine what USC could do if they had Michigan's trench play. Well, imagine what Michigan could do for a minute if they had USC's wide receivers and USC's quarterback. If Michigan just has USC's wide receivers and quarterback right here, or maybe just their wide receivers, I don't know, but probably include quarterback or QB room, since Alex Orji's mobility really helped Michigan, this is a national title contender. That's how good the trench play is. And watching the offensive line block at a higher level, persevere, at times they were pushing USC's defensive line 3 or 4 yards back off the line of scrimmage. Josiah Stewart was constantly this matchup advantage for Elijah Page, and it was great. It was something that Michigan had showed for bits and pieces against Arkansas State, against Texas, and against Fresno State, but it was on full display here on Saturday. I think Kalel Mullings is obviously number 1. That's one of the biggest takeaways of this game. And to show their dominance in the trenches, the Wolverines had 25 more rushing attempts than USC, had 184 more rushing yards. They averaged 1.7 more yards per carry. And no, that wasn't sack adjusted, but Orji took some Orgy took some hits behind the line of scrimmage several times, and USC had their fair share of sacks and TFLs. They still had the more dominant ground game, even if you take out sackage. And Michigan had 2 more sacks than USC's defense did. They had an additional tackle for loss. And they were 3 of 3. 3 of 3 on 4th down. First one was a QB sneak that should have been a delay of game. They easily got it. Second one, people said the spot was questionable. I at first thought that Michigan didn't get it. Upon further review, it looked like the tip of the ball touched the yellow line, which means it would have been a first down. Too close to call. At that point, ruling on the field stands. It just is what it is. And then the third one was just obviously, come on. USC's defense knew what was coming, and they still couldn't stop it right there. That right there, if I showed a fan, college football fan, whether an expert or a casual, those things before the game, said that Michigan will run for about 25 more times, gain almost 200 more yards on the ground compared to USC. They'll average basically an extra 5 to 6 feet per carry. They'll have more sacks, more TFLs, and they'll be 3 of 3 on 4th down. That probably would give you a confident idea that Michigan would win this game, or at least be in it until the 4th quarter and make it a dogfight. And indeed, Michigan did make it a dogfight, and they came out with the victory. Something I want to talk about before we close out here is the fact that Michigan cannot pass the football. The combination of quarterback and wide receiver talent makes this pass offense bad. And while Alex Orji, I think, fits this offense far better than Davis Warren did, no, he did not have a phenomenal game, but he was basically pressured every down, whether he was throwing or not. He did pretty well with his legs. And Davis Warren, while he may have passed the football better on paper, probably would have had a turnover, an extra one, given to USC, or an extra 2 or an extra 3. You just can't have that. Orji is, ironically, both the safer option and also the option with the higher upside in general. So therefore, you're going to go with him because he has that higher ceiling and also a higher floor. He makes this rushing offense really hard to deal with. I mean, USC knew what was coming every play. Every play. That's why they were so efficient in the second half at stopping it. They knew what was coming. And at the end of the day, it still didn't matter looking at that final drive. And also some of the drives in the first half. Michigan's rushing offense is really, really, really good. And if they find a way to just have a below average to average passing offense, this offense will immediately go from being, in my view, bad to below average to being good, maybe even great. That's how much a difference a marginal improvement can make on your weak side of the offense or defense. One-dimensionality kills. An example is Iowa. Iowa right now is one of the best rushing offenses in the country. Their offensive line is awesome. But because they have Cade McNamara and a very untested receiver core, well, their offense isn't good. It could be good, but that's not the case right now. And it's the same thing with Michigan right here. They have a lot of talent and a lot to work with, but they have clear limitations in the passing offense, and that makes this offense, at best right now, an average, maybe above average unit on a very good day. If Michigan's offense wants to be good or have the capability to be good, Orji needs to improve at passing the ball. The receivers need to get better separation, get better at catching the ball, and Michigan's staff may be smart to actually pass the ball more than what might be optimal against a team like Minnesota this coming week, or even Washington on the road if they can find a way to get up big in that game. Because Michigan plays Illinois, Oregon, Indiana, Ohio State, Michigan State, and Washington on the road will still be a test. Minnesota is a team that I still believe, while clearly not back to their 2019 selves, has something to them. I mean, Michigan does have a very tough schedule. So whenever they can find reps for Orji to pass the ball to make him more comfortable, the better, in my view. He was 7 of 12 for 32 yards, didn't even average 3 yards per pass attempt, and he ran for 43 yards on 3.3 yards per attempt. The disparity in the rushing game and the passing game was insane. Michigan finished with 290 rushing yards, averaging over 6 yards per carry. Their passing attack finished with 32 yards and averaged a grand 2.7 yards per carry. So again, terrible passing offense, great, near elite, at the end of the year could be elite rushing offense. That averages out to a below average, bad average offense right there. Completely one-dimensional. And good defensive coordinators, which Jim Knowles is one of them, Aaron Henry is one of them, they will know how to attack this offense. And at that point, Michigan will have to completely trust in their physicality and hope that it's far superior compared to the opponent. And it's not something you want to rely upon when facing, Brett Bielema or facing Ryan Day or facing these Big Ten teams. It's not something you want. My MVP of this game, before we close out, is Kalel Mullings at running back. He had 17 carries for 159 rushing yards, nearly 10 yards per carry, and 2 rushing touchdowns. He's Michigan's running back number 1, and they should be giving him like 20 carries per game and using Donovan Edwards more, not just in the slot at receiver, but also out of the backfield. Using Edwards more as a receiving back and then mixing him in to try and get big plays or putting him and Mullings in the backfield at the same time would give Michigan's passing offense and also rushing offense more dynamic playmaking capability, and they need as much of that as they can get. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for being Heisman members and sponsoring this video and channel. Thanks to Chris Slayton, Connor OH, Ismar, Tyler 9, Chilton Kush for being All-American members. Thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janaisha Cockrell for being All-Conference members. Have a great day, guys. Make sure to check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and also Discord server via the link in the description and down below in the pinned comment. Have a nice night, guys. Go Trojans, and go Blue.